I came into season 3 of The Mandalorian wondering where the show was going. The 2 Mandalorian episodes of the Book of Boba Fett undid the finale of The Mandalorian season 2. So it left me wondering what the point of the show even is. They chose, it seems, to make season 3 the Bo-Katan show. She is very much the Mandalorian of season 3, far more than Din Djarin is. Once Grogu went and got Bo-Katan to come back to Mandalore to help rescue Din Djarin, who had been captured by that sort of spider mech beast thing, it became evident that this was going to be far more her story than it was going to be his. So the question I was hoping to get answered was, will this be another rise and fall of Bo-Katan? Or will she be finally able to set aside her pride and lead her people back to Mandalore to reestablish their home? And this season finale gave me that answer. So let's talk about it. The episode opens up with Axe Woves flying up towards the Mandalorian fleet in orbit. Yes, we have to ignore, I think, in the first episode of this season, where the Mandalorian jetpacks didn't have enough fuel to follow that bird after it had snatched that foundling. And now here in the season finale of season 3, their jetpacks contain enough fuel to fly all the way into orbit. But be that as it may, the show does enjoy putting things like logistics aside for the plot. Axe Woves is on his way up to rendezvous with the fleet to let them know what they've discovered. And while in flight, Bo-Katan radios him and lets him know that Moff Gideon is launching Imperial fighters and bombers to go up into orbit and attack and destroy the fleet. So he's to get them evacuated off the main cruiser onto all the gauntlet ships and have them come down and join Bo-Katan while they try to flee the base. Get away from the troops. So then Din is being dragged, seemingly unconscious, by a couple of Imperial stormtroopers on his way, presumably to his cell. And then he wakes up and tries to fight them off. Successful against one, but he's getting his ass kicked by the other until Grogu and the IG-12 mech thing comes and saves him. And Din Djarin makes the decision, instead of retreating, to try to catch up to Bo-Katan and the scout mission. He decides he's just going to seek out Moff Gideon and end this once and for all between them. And Grogu comes with him. So he contacts R5-D4 and tells him to come down into the base, hook up into the computer system, and find the schematics for the base so he can know where the command center is, because that's the most likely place where Moff Gideon will be found. So we get a cute scene of R5 coming down, and he's, scared and everything. He's not like R2-D2, where he's just kind of fearless. He's much more C-3PO in that he's like, this is not what I'm supposed to be doing kind of thing. So it's a cute, humorous scene where we cut back and forth between action and R5 doing his little mission, where the little mouse droids come around and discover him, and they're like harassing him. Anyway, nice humorous touch to the episode. So Axe finally arrives at the fleet in orbit, lets them know Imperials are coming. Everyone evacuates to the gauntlet ships, and they fly down towards the planet. And he takes control of the cruiser, the Mandalorian cruiser, by himself. His plan is to lure all the Imperial fighters and bombers to him, to attack him. And then he's going to try to destroy as many of them as he can for as long as he can hold out. And that will allow the rest of the Mandalorians to get down to the surface to join Bo-Katan in this fight for Mandalore. And because there's this thick cloud cover covering Mandalore, the gauntlet ships pass down through the clouds just as the Imperial ships are coming up through the clouds. So they pass by each other without seeing each other. So the Imperials don't know that most of the Mandalorians are now going below them on their way down to attack the base. And they show up, and Axe Woves basically starts trying to fight them off by himself, trying to command this cruiser alone. Din Djarin and Grogu arrive at that series of laser doors, that sort of Get Smart entrance that I mentioned in the previous episode. And with R5's help shutting down one door at a time, Mando Din is able to fight each set of guards as he slowly works his way all the way through until they get through that whole senseless little set of doors. Anyway, Grogu joins them. They find a far chamber, and it's a cloning room, and there's all these clone pods. And they discover these are all Moff Gideon clones. Din Djarin, for whatever reason, does something on the control panel to shut everything off, but shutting it off the power somehow causes all the pods to explode, and they run further into the base. So why turning the power off causes these things to just combust? No idea. There were no explosives or anything, so I don't know what he did, Didn't look like he overloaded the system. It looks like he like pressed the kind of off button, and that somehow like self-destructed the whole room. But whatever. Again, logistics are an inconvenience when the plot requires the plot. They continue on for their search for the actual real Moff Gideon. By this time, Bo-Katan and the scouts, Mandalorian scouts, have followed these Mandalorian survivors to where they've been living in a separate underground area where they've been farming and replanting agriculture because there's enough light working its way down. And Bo-Katan thought that they discovered this when they're like, no, we've been planting this. We discover if you give them the soil, you do the work, give them the light, they'll regrow. So it's proof that Mandalore can be restored, which I think does give this small group of Mandalorians like kind of new energy and new life, because they can see it's now tangible that it can be done, but they still have to win this fight. So at this point, the gauntlets begin to come down. They begin to arrive. Bo and the scouts go up, and we get another gauntlet drop where the Mandalorians are all dropping down out of the ships because it's going to be aerial combat between jetpack Mandalorians and jetpacked Imperial troops. And we get the beginning of that sort of crazy fight in the air. You have the armor just bludgeoning people with her blacksmith tools. Bo-Katan like takes out the Darksaber and leads the charge down as the troopers are coming up. And she's like slicing and dicing troops and everything. A really cool, really well done, battle. It's one of the things they really did a great job of this season is taking those sort of Mandalorian like fighting tactics and air battles where we saw in the animated series in Clone Wars and Rebels, and doing a really good job of bringing that to live action. That was one of the highlights of the season, was how well they handled these aerial battles between people on jetpacks. Really, really good job. If you go back to season 1, when we first got, the group of Mandalorians, I think it was it might have been in, I don't know if it was the finale of season 1 or if it was the penultimate episode where the Mandalorians showed up to help Din and they come down in jetpacks. And that was like just, 4 or 5 of them. Here, it's like massive troops on both sides battling it in the air, and pretty well done, well choreographed fight throughout this rest of the episode. But we cut to Moff Gideon, who has decided that he's not going anywhere. He wants to now confront Din Djarin as well. He wants this fight over. He wants the Mandalorians destroyed. So he's going to start with Din Djarin, and there's Grogu. And he has his sort of Darth Maul-inspired armor, which we now learn isn't just Beskar. It's like, it seems to be sort of mechanized to some degree where it enhances his ability. Kind of a mech suit, Beskar suit combo, in that it gives him enhanced strength. And he's really difficult to fight one-on-one, which Din Djarin learns pretty quickly. Because it's not just fighting him in Beskar, it's a powered Beskar suit. Not trying to fight Iron Man levels, but much more powerful than any of the Mandalorians themselves in a one-on-one case. And then the 3 Praetorian guards come out, and this is when Grogu decides to get into the fray and lures the Praetorian guards away because they're kicking Din Djarin's ass. And they go after him, and that leaves Din and Moff Gideon one-on-one with each other. And we get their fight now unfolding. Now, the stuff with Grogu and the Praetorian guards is kind of silly. He's in the mech suit, and there's only so much he can do, enough till it falls over and it's no longer usable. And then he leaps out, and he's like leaping along these like girders and stuff. And it's, it is a little goofy because this is, as much as you like practical, it does get a little goofy when you have a puppet like bouncing around like it's the Muppets or something. So that's one of those things where it's like, it's tough to find that right balance between CGI and practical effects, and just don't pay close enough attention to it. And I guess it works, but it is a little goofy because he's like, oh, and these are Praetorian guards, and they're like, it wasn't as bad as the Obi-Wan show where, apparently the hardest thing to catch in the entire history of the galaxy is like an 8-year-old girl. She seems to have outchase, elude everybody, even the best bounty hunters in that galaxy. So at least it's not that silly level. he at least has the Force, which helps him out. So then we come back to the main battle, and we have Bo-Katan's flying around, and she sees Moff Gideon and this fight unfolding, and then she decides to come down and help. So she comes down, helps Din Djarin, and tells him, I've got Moff Gideon, you go rescue your son. Go rescue Grogu. Din goes and helps Grogu defeat the Praetorian Guards. Between Grogu using the Force and Din Djarin's just general combat skills, one by one, the 3 Praetorian Guards are killed. And Bo-Katan is now facing off against Moff Gideon, and he pulls out this big Beskar-like spear with like energy blades at the ends, and it's her darksaber against that. And again, he's the much more physically imposing and stronger fighter, but this is Bo-Katan. She's been a warrior her whole life. She's wielding the darksaber, and her and the darksaber are very much in sync, unlike the darksaber and Din Djarin. And by the way, we got no explanation of why Din Djarin couldn't wield the darksaber very well, why it was rejecting him. That's just something that was there. The show apparently is never going to give us any legitimate explanation for. But anyway, it's a cool fight back and forth, but not an easy one, because Moff Gideon is, again, that suit he's in gives him enhanced physical abilities. And he gets to the point where he grabs her hand that's wielding the darksaber and crushes the hilt, like destroying the darksaber pretty much. And she falls to her knees, and she appears to be defeated. But at this point, we see Axe Woes in a like just completely on fire cruiser, and he like on the radio, he's like, "Get out of there! I'm gonna crash the cruiser into the base to destroy it." And Din Djarin and Grogu come and help Bo-Katan. So now it's Bo, Din, and Grogu against Moff Gideon, and they're back and forth. And Moff Gideon has now just switched to a blaster at this point because he realizes, okay, he's outnumbered, so he wants a little distance and using his blaster. And Bo-Katan's got that sort of energy shield that some of the Mandalorians have, and she's protecting them from the energy blasts. And then as the cruiser is coming down, Axe Woes gets out of the ship last minute. The cruiser smashes into the base. Everyone else is out of there at this point. And Moff Gideon, Din Djarin, Bo-Katan, and Grogu are all continuing to fight. And it gets to the point where Grogu is like, enough of this, and just force pushes Din Djarin back away from them towards the edge of the platform as everything's collapsing behind them. And between Grogu pushing Bo-Katan, deflecting his the blaster shots, and then Din Djarin grabbing a blaster and shooting at Moff Gideon's armor, it pushes him back just enough so the flames just crash down and consume him. But then the flames rush into the whole chamber. Just as it looks like they're all going to be consumed in the flames, we suddenly see Grogu like using the Force, finally using the Force to a degree you would expect him to, especially after going through some formal training with Luke Skywalker. And he's bending the fire around the 3 of them, protecting Bo, Din, and himself. And he keeps that going until the fire like kind of burns out and sweeps past them and then dissipates. And then we cut to the sacred waters, the pool underground, where they're all gathered, and Ragnar, the foundling, Paz Vizsla's son that they rescued from that sort of pterodactyl creature at the beginning of the season, he's now taking his oath and going from foundling, I guess, to apprentice, Mandalorian apprentice. And they all cheer him, and then Grogu is presented by Din Djarin. So I was like, and he says, he's no longer founding, he's my apprentice. I want him to take his vows. And the armor is like, he can't even speak, so he's too young. He's gonna have to stay a foundling. And then Din Djarin asks her, it's like, if his parents were to give permission for him to become a foundling, even, basically give him permission that the oath could be taken, at least in an honorable sense, and then he can retake it when he can speak later. Would that be permissible? And the armor is like, well, yes. If his parents were here, they could give that permission. As far as everyone knows, his parents are dead. And then Din announces, well, then I will formally adopt him as my son. And she's like, okay, if he's your son, I now proclaim him Din Grogu, and he's now an apprentice. And then later on, at some point in the future, when they get around to figuring out what kind of voice they want to give the character, might get a scene where they come back here and give the oath formally, but at this point, Din Djarin is now a father, and Grogu is now Din Grogu, accepted as his son and as a Mandalorian apprentice. And as all new apprentices must do, their master, if you will, must take them out on their now apprentice journeys. So Din Djarin and Grogu have to leave Mandalore and go out on their journeys, which is what Din did when he was apprentice, and each of them have done at that point in their earlier part of their lives. So then we cut once more to the Great Forge, and all the Mandalorians are gathered. We see Axe Woes and a lot of the other Night Owls, plus all the people to watch. They're all now intermingled. They're all one people. They're all just Mandalorians now. And Ragnar, Paz Vizsla's son, is standing next to Axe Woes. And you kind of get the impression that Axe has decided to kind of take on the mantle of overseeing the apprenticeship of Ragnar, since his father is dead. And I wanted to mention, as we ended the scene at the Sacred Waters and cut to the Great Forge, the camera first pans down deep under the Sacred Waters to where you see a very content mythosaur. And then it cuts to the Great Forge, and we have the whole crowd gathered. The armor hands a lit torch to Bo-Katan. She relights the Great Forge, and for Mandalore, shouts go up. And this is now the beginning of life on Mandalore for the Mandalorians, where they can now start to rebuild. And then there's just wrapping up the season to go with what Din Djarin and Grogu are going to be doing, like kind of setting up their next set of adventures. And we see them fly back to that cantina that we saw earlier in the season. That's kind of the X-Wing pilots like hangout, the New Republic, like scouts in the outer area. So they go there, meet up with the same captain we saw throughout like the last couple of seasons, and he offers himself to be off the books, kind of like patrolling this outer sector, because the New Republic doesn't have the resources or the manpower to do it. And he's like, I'll patrol this outer area and like start taking care of these Imperial forces as I find them and capture them and turn them over to you, and it'll be an off-the-books arrangement. To which the guy kind of agrees that he understands how beneficial it will be, even though they have to kind of keep it on the down low. And then Din Djarin asks for his first payment to be, there's an IG-11 head above the bar. So he takes that. And then we cut back to Navarro, which we were going to come back to at some point here in this final episode. And he arrives there. Greef Karg presents him with a deed to like a little homestead just outside of town to be Din and Grogu's home. And then Din presents him with a restored IG-11. So Navarro finally, 3 seasons in, has a sheriff again. Just one robot, just one droid. But it's a start. It's better than going 2 whole seasons without any kind of real security apparatus on that planet. And then this show ends with Din just kind of chilling on his porch, and Grogu's using the Force to play with some of the frogs in the pond. And we get that close out of the camera. And that's it. And that's season 3. Now, overall, a kind of a disjointed season. I was super happy with that it was a Bo-Katan-centric season. Bo-Katan's one of my favorite characters. She's my favorite Mandalorian, and has been since she showed up in that Ahsoka centric episode in the Clone Wars way back. And it was nice to finally see her like get to put aside her pride, and instead of failing and falling like she usually does because of her pride and hubris, she finally kind of puts that aside, gains some humility, and accepts a proper leadership role, and is successful for once. Even though they paid a decent price for that success, they still finally managed. She finally had a proper win for the first time in probably a long time. So I was really happy about that. Now, that said, I am convinced that those 2 Mandalorian episodes in the Book of Bo-Katan, not the Book of Bo-Katan, in the Book of Boba Fett, were meant to be episodes 1 and 2 of this season. Because if you go back and watch those, they are the perfect set of episodes for what happened this season. And I think part of why this season feels a little disjointed and a little directionless at points is because they lost 2 episodes and then had to fill them in. So we got silly things like Jack Black and Lizzo stuff to kind of pad out the time that they like sacrificed to try to help out the Book of Boba Fett show. I don't know if that was in the end a smart thing to do, because imagine for people who only watch The Mandalorian and they don't watch the Book of Boba Fett, they don't watch The Bad Batch, this is their show. You know, it would be like, wait a minute, this dude went off with Luke Skywalker. What is he doing back? What happened? So really kind of strange to have such a critical plot change happen in a different show. So that's why I believe those were meant to really be the first 2 episodes of this season. But overall, a lot of setup in this season. That was really what, outside of the main, like Bo-Katan, like rising to the top again, and Grogu finally passing from foundling to apprentice. Outside of those main story beats, a lot of this season was set up for the Ahsoka series we're going to be getting. A lot of pieces put in place for that, the beginnings of what will eventually become the First Order. We have Grand Admiral Thrawn coming in the Ahsoka series. Ahsoka is pretty much going to be, by the looks of it, continuing where Rebels left off, just in live action. So it's interesting, and this is, in some ways, maybe that's a good thing, but in other ways, maybe that's a bad thing, where a show doesn't just get to be a show, where it has to accomplish these other things for a different show. This is one of the areas where Marvel, I think, is running into some problems. As nice as it is to have a rich, interconnected story world, it does get a little cumbersome when, hey, before you go see this movie, you have homework. There's these 3 TV shows that you have to watch. Otherwise, you're going to have no idea what's going on in this movie. So that's a little tricky, especially when your marketing campaign doesn't actually kind of explain that to what you expect your audience to be. This is something that Disney seems to struggle with here, because I don't know how many people, or I would say a lot more people, watch The Mandalorian, will watch a Star Wars movie, then will go to Star Wars Celebration or watch the live streams of Star Wars Celebration on YouTube. I don't know how many fans, just general fans of the show and movies, will pay attention to any of that stuff. So it's not enough to give that information to the hardcore fans. They really should kind of find a way to work that whole interconnected picture into the casual viewer somehow. Even if it's just a little special, like around the holiday, that kind of just pieces everything together. But we'll see. I don't know. But overall, I do think it's hard to grade this season. In some ways, it's the weakest of the 3 seasons. But in other ways, it contains some of my favorite stuff in this series so far. Because again, I'll take all the Bo-Katan. I'll take the Mandalorian show that's just about Bo-Katan, but that's just personal preference. Din Djarin is a fine character. I don't think he's a great character. I think he's another character they don't really know what to do with. And this was the big problem with the Book of Boba Fett. They had no idea what to do with Boba Fett. And that became very, very evident in that series, that they just had no idea what to even do with the character. So I hope that they took the time, because apparently they said the next season was already written. So that worries me a little bit, that they didn't sit down and take the time and then kind of refocus this show. So, but can they even, if it's going to be just tying in to other, like the Ahsoka show and whatever's going to come after that? I don't know. I don't know if it's just the Favreau and Filoni, or is it Kathleen Kennedy and Feige? I don't know who. Feige might just be Marvel. I'm not sure. So I don't know if there isn't Lucas anymore as at the top, keeping everything kind of flowing in the direction it needs to go. So we'll see. But overall, I'd probably give it a 7 out of 10 this season. Some parts for me were 9 out of 10. Other parts were like kind of 3 and 4 out of 10. But I think overall, I give it a 7. Happy for all the Bo-Katan stuff, and I'll take as much of that as I can get. Hopefully, we'll get her in the Ahsoka series, but we'll see. We'll see, because we're gonna have Sabine in there, so there's gonna be Mandalorian crossover stuff, and we better have Timu playing live action Rex. So that's all I gotta say. We better get a live action Rex, and at some point, where is my live action Hondo? I mean, come on. Rebels, perfect show to bring Hondo back finally, because he was in that. He's tied into all this stuff. So I mean, come on, everybody who watched all that stuff wants a live action Hondo. That's the kind of side character, supporting character who kind of just shows up. That's the one everyone has been waiting for. So at some point, you got to give it to us. Anyway, I don't want to get off track, and I think I'm already off track. Overall, 7 out of 10 this season. Some great stuff. Some rather mediocre and meandering stuff. I hope they kind of tone down the Celebrity of the Week stuff going forward. Like I said, I'm just going to kind of look at that as filler to replace those 2 Mandalorian episodes they threw over to the Boba Fett show. And I think on a rewatch, when I go and rewatch this series at some point later, when I finish season 2, I'm probably just going to go and watch those 2 Mandalorian-centric episodes in Boba Fett and then continue with season 3. So I think it'll probably play better if you just do it that way. Thank you for following along with my sort of season 3 meandering sort of review discussions. And I'm really looking forward to Ahsoka. Yes, yes, with how we've been burned with Obi-Wan and the sequel trilogy, I still have high hopes for Ahsoka, because I loved the Clone Wars series. I loved Rebels. So if they can capture the magic of those in the Ahsoka series, I'm actually looking forward to that quite a lot. I am willing to give that the benefit of the doubt up front. I'm not going to let the abomination known as the Obi-Wan show interfere with my hopes for the Ahsoka show. And that's a wrap for Mandalorian Season 3.